Loud people demand attention. Quiet people control it, and most don't even realize when it's happening. Most people misunderstand silence from the very beginning. They confuse it with weakness because they've been conditioned to believe that volume equals value. From childhood, the loudest student is called confident. The one who speaks the most is seen as social. The one who argues back is labeled strong. Meanwhile, the quiet one is often misread as insecure, shy, passive, or even incapable. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The world often fears what it cannot read, and quiet people are difficult to read. That difficulty creates tension. That tension creates caution, and caution shifts power. When you speak less, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. The focus of the room shifts away from your words and onto your presence. People start studying your facial expressions more carefully. They try to decode your reactions. They analyze your tone when you finally decide to speak. In a strange psychological way, your silence forces others to do more mental work. And the person who makes others think more often holds the upper hand, because now they are reacting internally while you remain externally calm. There's something deeply destabilizing about a person who does not rush to fill empty space. Silence makes most people uncomfortable. It creates a vacuum, and humans naturally rush to fill vacuums. They overshare, they confess, they justify, they reveal. In conversations, the one who cannot tolerate silence will often expose far more than they intended. But the one who can sit in that silence calmly, maintaining eye contact, breathing slowly, saying nothing unnecessary, that person becomes psychologically dominant without raising their voice. This is not about being antisocial. It's about understanding energy exchange. Every time you speak impulsively, you give away information. Information about your emotions, information about your triggers, information about your insecurities. The more predictable your reactions, the easier you are to manipulate. But when you become selective with your words, measured in your responses, slow in your reactions, you disrupt predictability. And unpredictability demands respect. Think about leaders who rarely speak but command attention when they do. Think about the person in the room who says very little during the meeting, but when they finally offer an opinion, everyone listens carefully. Why does that happen? Because scarcity increases value. When something is rare, it feels important. If you speak constantly, your words lose weight. If you speak intentionally, your words gain gravity, and gravity pulls attention toward you without force. But the real danger of being quiet lies deeper than social dynamics. It lies in emotional control. Most people are controlled through emotional triggers. Insults provoke anger. Criticism provokes defensiveness. Rejection provokes desperation. And manipulators rely on these predictable responses. They push buttons and expect reactions. But when they push your button and receive nothing, no visible anger, no defensive explanation, no emotional outburst, they lose leverage. Because emotional leverage requires visible emotion. Imagine someone attempting to disrespect you publicly. They expect you to react. They expect raised voices. They expect argument. But instead, you respond with a calm pause, a steady gaze, a simple, measured sentence, or perhaps nothing at all. That silence does something unexpected. It makes them question themselves. It makes the room question them. Suddenly, their aggression looks excessive, their volume looks insecure, and your restraint looks powerful. There's a psychological principle known as projection. When people lack information about you, they project their own assumptions onto you. Silence creates informational gaps, and those gaps are filled by imagination. If you appear calm, composed, observant, people assume intelligence. If you remain steady under pressure, people assume strength. If you don't rush to explain yourself, people assume confidence. And the most fascinating part is this: they create that image in their own minds, which makes it far more convincing than if you had tried to convince them verbally. But this only works if your silence is controlled. Silence without confidence feels awkward. Silence with anxiety feels uncomfortable. but silence with composure feels intentional. That's the difference. Your body language must align with your quietness. Your posture must be upright, your eye contact steady, your breathing slow. When silence is paired with internal stability, it becomes intimidating, not because you threaten anyone, but because you appear unshakable. And unshakable people are difficult to manipulate. The world today rewards noise. Social media platforms amplify outrage. The loudest opinion often spreads the fastest. People compete for attention through exaggeration. But attention is not the same as influence. Influence is built through credibility, and credibility is built through control. The person who can regulate their emotions, regulate their speech, regulate their reactions, that person becomes stable, and stability is rare. Silence also enhances perception. When you're not busy planning your next sentence, you're actually listening. You hear subtle shifts in tone. You notice hesitation. You observe contradictions between words and body language. You detect insecurity hidden beneath confidence. These details are invisible to those who are too busy talking. And the more you observe, the more strategically you can navigate social environments. There's another layer people rarely consider. When you constantly explain yourself, you subconsciously position yourself as needing approval. Explanation often comes from a place of seeking validation. But when you make a decision and don't feel the need to justify it excessively, you signal certainty, and certainty commands respect. People may not agree with you, but they recognize firmness. Over time, something interesting happens. The quiet person begins to shape the emotional tone of the room. Because they are not reactive, others begin adjusting themselves around that calm presence. The emotional temperature lowers, the chaos reduces, the space stabilizes. And without ever demanding authority, the quiet person becomes a center of gravity. But there is a reason this power feels dangerous. It disrupts social expectations. Most people rely on predictable behavior. They feel safe when they understand someone's patterns. But when someone is reserved, observant, and emotionally controlled, it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty forces caution. Caution forces respect. Silence also protects you from long-term strategy. Loud people announce their plans prematurely. They broadcast their ambitions. They reveal their goals before they're solid. And when they fail, everyone knows. But the quiet individual builds in silence. They improve without advertisement. They prepare without applause. And when results finally appear, they seem sudden to outsiders. But in reality, they were constructed patiently in the background. There's power in moving unnoticed. Underestimation can be an advantage. When people assume you are less capable because you don't advertise yourself, they lower their guard. They don't compete aggressively. They don't sabotage as intensely. They don't prepare defenses. And that gives you room to maneuver strategically. But the real reason silence is dangerous is this. It reflects internal mastery. Most people speak to release emotional tension. They talk to reduce anxiety. They react to discharge stress. But when you can sit with your emotions without externalizing them impulsively, you demonstrate control over yourself. And self-control is the foundation of all other forms of control. The person who controls themselves cannot be easily controlled by others. And once you reach that level, where you are no longer reacting automatically to every stimulus, you become different. People sense it. They may not understand it, but they feel it. You are no longer competing for attention. You are commanding space without asking for it. And that shift changes everything. There's a silent hierarchy that exists in every social environment, and most people never consciously recognize it. It isn't written on walls, and no one announces it out loud, but it operates constantly beneath conversations, beneath laughter, beneath arguments. It is the hierarchy of emotional control. The person who loses emotional control first usually loses influence first. The one who becomes defensive, who explains too much, who reacts too quickly, subtly lowers their position. And the one who remains steady, measured, and observant quietly rises.
Silence strengthens your position in that invisible hierarchy because it slows you down. It forces you to respond instead of react. Reaction is automatic. Response is intentional. Most people live in reaction mode. Someone criticizes them, and they instantly defend themselves. Someone challenges them, and they instantly escalate. Someone ignores them, and they instantly seek reassurance. But the quiet individual does something different. They pause, and that pause is powerful. That pause communicates, I am not controlled by this moment. It shows restraint, and restraint is rare. When you become known as someone who doesn't react impulsively, people begin to adjusting their behavior around you. They choose their words more carefully. They avoid unnecessary confrontation. They think twice before testing you, not because you are aggressive, but because you are unpredictable. And unpredictability.
The more disciplined you become with actions, the more controlled your outcomes become. People often underestimate how much weakness is revealed through unnecessary talking. Gossip reveals insecurity. Complaints reveal dissatisfaction. Constant bragging reveals validation seeking. Defensive explanations reveal self-doubt. But silence hides vulnerabilities until you choose to reveal them intentionally. It gives you control over your narrative, and control over your narrative is everything. Most individuals accidentally give others control over how they are perceived. They overshare too early. They trust too quickly. They speak about future plans before they are solid. They complain about struggles publicly, and all of that creates openings. But when you move strategically, sharing selectively, revealing slowly, observing constantly, you eliminate those openings. The quiet person becomes a vault, and vaults are respected because they hold value. There is another dimension to silence that makes it powerful: emotional neutrality. When someone tries to provoke you and you respond neutrally, it creates confusion. Provocation relies on visible impact. When there is no visible impact, the provocateur loses satisfaction, and when they lose satisfaction repeatedly, they stop trying. Emotional neutrality is not suppression, it is mastery. It is the ability to feel without broadcasting. And once you master emotional broadcasting, you become difficult to destabilize. Destabilizing others is a common subconscious strategy. Some individuals raise their voices to dominate. Some interrupt to control direction. Some use sarcasm to lower your status, but all of these tactics require your participation. When you refuse to participate emotionally, their strategy collapses. You may have noticed this before. In a heated argument, if one person suddenly becomes calm, the entire energy shifts. The one who remains angry begins to look irrational. The room subtly sides with the composed individual. Why? Because humans instinctively associate calmness with control, and we trust control more than chaos. Silence also builds an aura of intentionality. When you don't speak casually, people assume that when you do speak, it matters. Your words feel deliberate. Your tone feels calculated. Even if you are simply being thoughtful, others interpret it as depth, and depth attracts attention differently than noise. But let's address something important. Being quiet is not about withdrawal from the world. It is not about isolation or fear of expression. It is about strategic expression. It is about understanding that not every thought deserves voice. Not every emotion deserves display. Not every challenge deserves confrontation. Wisdom often appears in what you choose not to say. There is strength in withholding immediate reactions. In high-stress environments, the one who panics spreads instability. The one who remains composed stabilizes others, and stabilizers become leaders naturally. People look toward the calm presence when chaos rises, because calm suggests capability. Over time, your reputation begins to shift. At first, you may be underestimated. Then you are observed. Then you are respected. Eventually, you are consulted, because people recognize that you do not waste words. You do not react emotionally. You do not chase validation, and those qualities signal maturity. But perhaps the most dangerous element of silence is this: it gives you time. Time to think, time to calculate,
Time to choose the most effective move instead of the fastest move. And in competitive environments, the most effective move usually wins over the fastest. The loud individual may dominate attention temporarily, but the quiet individual often dominates outcomes long-term. There's also a subtle psychological reversal that happens when you remain silent during moments others expect speech. It creates intrigue. People become curious. Curiosity pulls them toward you. Instead of you chasing attention, attention drifts toward you naturally, and what comes naturally often feels more powerful than what is forced. Silence also protects your energy. Words require energy. Arguments drain energy. Defensiveness drains energy. But measured speech conserves energy, and conserved energy can be redirected toward growth, skill development, and strategy. Over months and years, that difference compounds dramatically. And here is something most people never realize. The quiet person often sees more because they are not blinded by ego. Ego demands to be heard. Ego demands recognition. Ego demands validation. But when you detach from that need, your perception sharpens. You observe dynamics others miss. You notice alliances forming. You detect subtle tension shifts, and that awareness positions you ahead of situations before they escalate. Silence also increases internal confidence. When you stop seeking approval through words, you begin building approval internally. You validate yourself, you trust your judgment, and that self-trust radiates subtly. People sense when someone trusts themselves, and self-trust is magnetic. But make no mistake, this path requires discipline. It requires resisting the urge to correct every misunderstanding. It requires tolerating being underestimated temporarily. It requires patience when others are loud and you choose not to compete. But the long-term reward is influence without force. The most dangerous person in any environment is not the loudest threat. It is the calm observer, the one who studies before acting, the one who listens more than they speak, the one who reveals less than they know. Because when they finally move, their move is calculated. And calculated moves are rarely accidental. They are precise, they are intentional, and they are effective. Silence is not the absence of power, it is the containment of it, and containment makes it stronger. Power does not always announce itself. In fact, real power rarely does. It does not raise its voice. It does not rush to explain itself. It does not seek permission to exist. The loud person in the room is often trying to control perception. The quiet one is controlling reality, and that difference is everything. Because when you speak less, people lean in more. When you reveal less, people imagine more. And imagination is far more powerful than information. When someone cannot fully read you, they begin projecting their own fears, expectations, and assumptions onto you. And in that moment, you are no longer reacting to the room is reacting to you. Silence shifts the psychological frame. Instead of you trying to convince others of your value, they begin to try to decode you, and decoding creates tension, and tension creates influence. Most people cannot tolerate uncertainty. They need clarity, they need reassurance, they need feedback. But the person who is comfortable sitting in that uncertainty without explaining themselves becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability is power. Because when people cannot predict your reactions, they hesitate, and hesitation gives you control of timing. Timing is dominance. There's a reason high-level negotiators speak slowly. There's a reason elite leaders pause before answering. There's a reason powerful figures often let others finish speaking before they respond. They understand something most people never learn. Whoever controls the pace controls the outcome. Silence slows everything down. It forces others to fill the gap, and when people fill gaps, they reveal themselves. They overshare, they justify, they expose weaknesses, they try to impress, they talk themselves into corners, and all you have to do is observe. Observation is intelligence in motion. The quiet person gathers data while everyone else is giving it away for free. You begin to see patterns in speech, in insecurity, in ego, in fear. You see who interrupts, who seeks validation, who needs approval, who hides behind humor, who becomes defensive. And once you see the pattern, you can predict behavior. Once you can predict behavior, you can influence it. This is not manipulation in the cartoon villain sense. This is psychological awareness, and awareness is a weapon when used intentionally. Silence also protects you. The more you talk, the more you expose leverage points. Every opinion you state, every weakness you confess, every emotional reaction you display becomes data that someone can use later. Most people underestimate how much others remember. A small insecurity revealed today can become a subtle attack tomorrow. A careless comment can shift how someone sees you permanently. But when you speak carefully and selectively, you reduce the surface area for attack. You become harder to read, harder to provoke, harder to destabilize. And people subconsciously respect what they cannot easily access. There is a psychological principle at play here. Scarcity increases value. When your words are rare, they carry weight. When you do not speak often, people assume that when you finally do, it matters. And that assumption alone increases your authority without you having to demand it. But here is where it becomes even deeper. Silence is not just about external control. It is about internal control. Most people speak impulsively because they are uncomfortable with their own thoughts. They rush to speak because they cannot tolerate the space between feeling and expression. But the gap between feeling and speaking is where power lives. When someone insults you and you immediately react, they control you. When someone challenges you and you rush to defend yourself, they control you. When someone provokes you and you explode, they control you. But when someone
Most people are addicted to being understood. They feel anxious if someone misinterprets them, so they over-explain. They clarify excessively. They defend every small detail. But over-explaining lowers status. It signals insecurity. The higher someone's perceived status, the less they feel the need to justify themselves. Think about it. Truly powerful individuals rarely explain themselves to everyone. They make decisions, they speak when necessary, and they move forward. Meanwhile, those seeking approval constantly defend their actions. Silence can break that cycle. When someone misunderstands you and you do not rush to correct them, you create intrigue. Sometimes letting people underestimate you is the strongest strategic move you can make, because expectations shape reactions. If someone believes you are less capable, they may reveal more, prepare less, or act more carelessly around you. And in that space, you gain advantage quietly. There is also an emotional discipline that silence builds. When you speak less, you are forced to listen more. And when you listen more, you become aware of subtleties others miss, tone shifts, micro-expressions, inconsistencies, hidden intentions. You begin to see conversations not just as exchanges of words, but as exchanges of power. Who is seeking validation? Who is trying to dominate? Who is trying to bond? Who is masking insecurity? This awareness sharpens intuition, and intuition is simply pattern recognition built over time. The quiet observer develops it faster than the loud participant, because participation consumes attention. Observation refines it. And then there is the final layer, the layer most people never consciously recognize. Silence creates mystery, and mystery creates fascination. People are drawn to what they cannot fully understand. It triggers curiosity. Curiosity triggers focus, and focus creates psychological pull. The person who talks endlessly becomes background noise. The person who speaks selectively becomes a point of attention. When you say less, your words land heavier. They echo longer. They are remembered. And being remembered is influence. So, the next time you feel the urge to fill silence with noise, pause. Notice the discomfort. Notice the impulse to justify yourself. Notice the desire to prove. And instead of reacting, observe what happens when you don't. Watch how others start speaking more. Watch how they reveal more. Watch how the dynamic shifts subtly in your favor. Silence is not absence. It is pressure. It is tension. It is space that forces others to move first.
and the one who moves first often reveals their position. When you master silence, you are no longer trying to be heard. You are deciding when to be heard, and that decision alone separates those who chase power from those who quietly hold it. There's a reason silence feels heavy in certain rooms. It is not emptiness, it is potential energy. When words stop, awareness increases. People begin scanning faces. They search for cues. They try to interpret meaning in expressions, posture, breathing. And in that heightened awareness, the person who remains calm becomes the psychological center of gravity. Silence shifts attention without demanding it. It pulls focus naturally. Think about how tension builds in a conversation when someone asks a direct question and the other person does not answer immediately. That pause feels long, even if it lasts only a few seconds. In that space, the one who waits is in control, because the other person begins to feel exposed. They start wondering what you are thinking. They question whether they said too much. They replay their own words internally. And the more they replay, the more they analyze themselves. Silence forces self-reflection in others, and self-reflection often creates insecurity. That insecurity subtly lowers their position while yours rises. Most people fear silence because they equate it with rejection or judgment. When you stop responding quickly, others may assume disapproval. When you do not laugh at every joke, they may question their humor. When you do not instantly agree, they begin to defend their position more aggressively. Silence exposes emotional dependency. It reveals who needs validation to feel stable. And once you recognize that, you see how fragile many social dynamics truly are. They are built on constant reassurance, constant noise, constant confirmation. Remove that noise and the structure shakes, but you remain steady. And steadiness is intimidating. There is also a deeper strategic advantage in silence during conflict. Arguments escalate through reaction. One person raises their voice, the other matches it. One person accuses, the other defends. Energy builds back and forth like a fire feeding on oxygen. But silence removes oxygen. When someone throws anger at you and you do not immediately respond, their momentum collapses. Anger needs resistance to sustain itself. Without resistance, it begins to look irrational. The aggressor suddenly becomes aware of their own intensity. They may even feel embarrassed. By refusing to escalate, you force them to confront their behavior alone. That is psychological leverage. You are no longer in the storm. You are observing it from above. But silence is not about passivity. It is about precision. When you finally speak after choosing silence intentionally, your words cut deeper because they are not emotional reactions. They are calculated responses, and calculated responses are sharper. Imagine two people debating. One talks continuously, repeating points, raising volume, trying to overwhelm. The other listens quietly, nodding occasionally, saying very little. Then, at the right moment, the quiet one delivers a single clear statement that dismantles the argument. That moment carries weight precisely because it is rare. Silence amplifies impact. It creates contrast, and contrast creates dominance. There is something else that silence does that most people overlook. It protects your future options. When you speak impulsively, you lock yourself into positions. You reveal intentions too early. You commit emotionally. But when you remain quiet, you retain flexibility. You can adjust strategy without contradiction. You can observe outcomes before choosing sides. Silence buys time, and time is one of the undervalued forms of power. The person who decides quickly under pressure often regrets later. The person who waits, gathers information, and then moves strategically rarely needs to backtrack. Silence is patience in action. In social hierarchies, the person who reacts least often holds the highest frame. Frame control is about who defines reality in the interaction. If someone insults you and you become defensive, they define the frame as you being inferior. If someone challenges your authority and you rush to prove yourself, they define the frame as you needing validation.
But if someone challenges you and you respond with calm curiosity or minimal acknowledgement, you redefine the frame. You signal that their attempt does not disturb your internal stability, and stability communicates superiority without arrogance. It is subtle, it is quiet, but it is felt. Silence also sharpens self-mastery. When you reduce unnecessary speech, you begin to notice your internal dialogue more clearly. You recognize how often you want to speak just to fill space, just to be seen, just to feel relevant. And when you resist that impulse, you build discipline. Discipline strengthens identity. Instead of chasing attention, you become comfortable with presence alone, and that comfort radiates. People sense when someone does not need approval. They may not articulate it, but they feel it, and humans instinctively respect self-sufficiency. There is a psychological law at work here. People value what they work for. If someone has to work harder to understand you, to earn your words, to gain your trust, they assign higher value to it. Easy access reduces perceived worth. Constant availability reduces impact, but selective expression increases curiosity. It increases effort, and increased effort deepens investment. Silence, when used intentionally, increases your perceived value because it creates effort on the other side. They lean in, they try to read you, they think about you after the interaction ends. You occupy space in their mind without occupying space in the conversation. However, mastering silence requires emotional resilience. There will be moments when others misinterpret your quiet nature as arrogance. Some may label you distant. Others may project insecurity onto you because they cannot read you clearly. And this is where many people break. They rush to correct perception. They overcompensate. They defend their position more aggressively. Silence exposes emotional dependency. It reveals who needs validation to feel stable. And once you recognize that, you see how fragile many social dynamics truly are. They are built on constant reassurance, constant noise, constant confirmation. Remove that noise and the structure shakes, but you remain steady, and steadiness is intimidating. There is also a deeper strategic advantage in silence during conflict. Arguments escalate through reaction. One person raises their voice, the other matches it. One person accuses, the other defends. Energy builds back and forth like a fire feeding on oxygen. But silence removes oxygen. When someone throws anger at you and you do not immediately respond, their momentum collapses. Anger needs